From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now, or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
This is one of the many responses we got to our earlier episode about supremacist groups infiltrating the U.S. military. This is a bit of a longer email, and our quote-unquote caller, our author, wishes to remain anonymous. But I picked this one because it gives us an angle we hadn't heard before. So here we go, and I'll just indicate when I'm paraphrasing or skipping something. Hello, I have been listening to the podcast for about 8 months, and I really enjoy it. I felt compelled to write in after your invitation for veterans to comment following the episode on white supremacists in the military. I would like to briefly tell my story as an example of what can happen when law enforcement actions targeting veterans become overzealous and demonize a veteran's knowledge, skills, and abilities rather than looking for legitimate signs of extremism or an intent to commit violence. And then this unknown soldier gives us a bit of their background. In the interest of anonymity, we won't go too far into it, just to say that this person always knew they wanted to join the armed forces. They joined the Army at age 20, and they were discharged honorably in 1999. From there, they returned to Arizona, and we'll pick it up here. I worked as an apprentice building custom rifles while attending college. In 2005, I graduated with a degree in wildlife management and immediately returned to federal public service working with the Department of Interior. I had been working in the backcountry of a national park in Hawaii for several years before I volunteered to go to Park Service part-time cop school. I was working in wildlife management, but there was a noticeable lack of law enforcement in the backcountry. I wanted to help protect the resources. I compiled a, quote, law enforcement appropriate resume listing all of my firearms and martial arts training and experience, believing my skills would be seen as something of value toward the goal of protecting natural resources. A short time later, I left Hawaii, returned to Arizona to work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on Mexican wolf recovery. So far, this is all innocuous stuff, and it seems like a pretty cool gig, right?
Totally.
So here's a turn. National Park Service law enforcement, says the unknown soldier, is akin to a patrol officer who protects and serves the visitors and natural resources of a natural park. As I learned, Fish and Wildlife Service agents are more closely related to an FBI agent than a police officer. They do undercover operations, stings, they use informants, and so on. Unbeknownst to me, when I transferred to Fish and Wildlife, agents checked up on me with the National Park Service and gained access to that resume. Rather than valuing this experience, they immediately became suspicious and began to create far-flung conspiracy theories in which they believed I was involved in New Sagebrush Rebellion extremist groups. Apparently, they couldn't believe that someone who trained in the art of war and served in the, just redacted, where this person served, was now genuinely interested in working with a bunch of tree huggers to protect wolves. The reality is I've always been a nonviolent tree and bunny hugger. It just took me a while to figure it out. It's hard to keep a secret in a town of 800 people. I eventually discovered I was under investigation. When I confronted my supervisor to try to clear things up, law enforcement went ballistic. Maybe they really believed I was extremist. Maybe they were just embarrassed at having been caught, but they were not going to simply admit they were wrong and let me stay at their job. And then the unknown soldier goes on to talk about intense surveillance, growing to overt harassment. They've done nothing wrong, and so they tried to stick it out through this campaign of harassment until an undercover agent stole their dog. And so they went to beat that person up, John Wick style, for stealing their dog. That's me editorializing here. And they were arrested for disorderly conduct, and then they had to resign after 11 years of federal service. And this goes on to say, like, you know, a lot of these things that we're seeing, large-scale efforts like the DOJ's Operation Vigilant Eagle, this person argues, have only demonized and isolated veterans while wasting millions of dollars to make law enforcement appear like they're doing something. Which is, we've heard before the veterans get locked out in the cold, but think about this. An unknown soldier says, we lose an average of 20 veterans to suicide every single day. Appreciate the show. I understand why you wanted to discuss this because you invited veterans to comment. I wanted to convey my firsthand experience with the problems associated with cracking down on veterans that the government thinks could be dangerous. In my case, I wasn't politically active or on social media making angry comments. They got things wrong. Law enforcement still got things wrong. They ended up destroying my career. It makes me regret having ever served my country. Thank you. Jeez. Anonymous. What do you think there? What are your initial reactions?
My initial reactions are, it's a shame. It's the same as any situation where a few bad apples spoil the bunch. I mean, people don't join military service typically, to do harm to people of other faiths or other religions. They typically do it out of a sense of duty to their country or out of a sense of perhaps necessity for the rewards that it can give you in terms of scholarships and be able to, perhaps you didn't grow up with as many privileges as a lot of folks are lucky enough to have. And then to be targeted in that way because of some people that have thrown in their lot with kind of a more of a racist outlook. And unfortunately, because of the reputation that some of, as we discussed in the episode, high command has for perhaps sharing that attitude. It's unfortunate. I don't know. Maybe I'm being naive, but that's how it feels to me.
I see. And I think that's a really good point, Noel, because one thing that really stood out about this communication is that we in the U.S., and maybe in your country as well if you're not in the U.S., we always hear about the great injustices done to veterans after they complete military service, right? Like the Veterans Affairs, the VA, is in terrible, terrible shape and has been for years. And that's not even a ding on the people who are working in the VA. In some ways, it's been kind of crippled by legislation, right? That's very limiting to these folks. And then we also see a lack of maybe counseling, a lack of real assistance, I would say, with job programs, with giving people that kind of second act post-military. But we don't see a lot of conversations about veterans being discriminated against, at least in the mainstream, right?
No, the trope is, like, there have been, depictions in literature and cinema, and of course we've seen it firsthand, where folks that are perhaps have experienced trauma in the service come out and they're not equipped to go back into daily routines, and they have a hard time finding employment because they're triggered by things, and they have experienced things and traumatic events that have led them to not function the same way that they once did. And there's obviously shades of that, but this added layer of the idea of across the board discrimination based on the actions of, just some, I think is heartbreaking, because it's true. It is difficult. And so many people do join the military just to do good work and to, be part of the solution and not, create more problems. But it's really tough. It's hard to fully wrap your head around this problem.
I'm wondering about this too, because I'd like to hear from other people who may have had a similar experience. We know that there's a word that stuck out that you used, unknown soldier, which was overzealous, right? Overzealous meaning that maybe with noble or genuine intentions, people still go overboard, and as a result end up doing more harm than good. that case we've referenced before where an FBI sting operation went wrong because someone joined a mosque and they were so desperate to get a successful sting operation that they tried to radicalize members of the mosque, and they scared the people at the mosque, and the people at the mosque called the FBI and said, "This person is crazy. We think they're going to blow something up. Here's their name. Help us, please." And then the FBI found out it was an FBI agent. This kind of this misapplication, right, of, again, millions of dollars here. It's dangerous because it's a balancing act too. Like, is it a result of people being fearful about this kind of quote unquote infiltration? I would be interested to hear whether something else happened in the context of this, like this Sagebrush Rebellion stuff. What exactly is going on there? This was, by the way, maybe they were burned from this, the LEOs, the law enforcement officers, because Sagebrush Rebellion, which some folks may not have heard of in the audience today, happened in the 1970s and 1980s. It was a movement in the U.S. that wanted to change, make fundamental changes to federal land control and use policies in 13 different states where the federal government had owned between 20 to 85% of the state's area, which is a lot. That's a lot for a government to own.
For sure.
So what I think is interesting about this is that our anonymous author here is saying that with the best of intentions and doing everything right until they took this person's dog, they're saying that Fish and Wildlife, with the help of the National Park Service, thought that this person was infiltrating their organization for some reason. So they're saying they were discriminated against because of their past military experience. And there are a lot of laws against this kind of discrimination. But again, sometimes these discrimination laws are very difficult to enforce, when the rubber hits the road. So I think it's a powerful note here, because that kind of, we haven't verified all the facts of this story, but if this is true, that kind of discrimination is what drives people further and further away from integration into society at a post-military level,
Yeah, no, I get it now, Ben. I apologize if I was overstating the case a little bit in my responses. I think this is a little bit more of a specific type of discrimination. But it does make me think, though, in some ways, that there is the potential, in the same way that, folks are doing this whole ACAB thing when it comes to police, and the idea that anyone that wants to become a law enforcement official is in some way has some agenda to, discriminate or to be racist or to be violent in some way. I think it's important that people realize that's not inherently the case. Just in the same way that people, there are good police officers and there are obviously really bad ones. And there are amazing, heroic human beings that give their lives, for this country. And then there are folks that they're not that way as well. It's true of any organization or clique or club.
As we said before, the thing about a lot of these militias that we see mentioned in the news here in the U.S. is that not a ton of them are actual veterans, right? Those for say an extremist supremacist militia, you would want veterans because of that training, but most of those folks are not going to be actual veterans themselves. In a very real way, they're wannabes. Or I learned a word here that I thought everyone would enjoy: cosplatriots.
Oh my gosh,
brutal, huh? I didn't write that.
Yeah,
it's scary though, because they're there, and perhaps it is the fear of this sort of stuff that leads members of some government agencies to discriminate against completely innocent veterans. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I do.